I wish I was as smart as Hippocrates, because 2,500 years ago, Hippocrates said that all disease begins in the gut.
Hmm.
And he didn't have the Human Microbiome Project. He didn't, he didn't have stool samples.
Yep.
He had none of this. And
Wow.
yet, the longer I do this, the more I realize and have proven it to myself and have published that, in fact, you choose the disease. I don't care, you name it, it began in the gut and
Hmm.
with leaky gut.
Hmm.
And if you had asked me even 15 years ago, well into this practice, what I thought about leaky gut, I would have said it was voodoo, pseudoscience.
Mm.
And now, with sophisticated tests, I can tell you that any disease process starts with leaky gut and
Wow.
ends when the gut is sealed. So the plant paradox was kind of two features simultaneously. One,
Hmm.
there are certain plant proteins that are part of the plant defense system against being eaten. And some people still find it hard to believe that plants do not want us to eat them.
Hmm.
Uh, they were not put here for us to eat. They were
Hmm.
here first. And they don't want to be eaten, and they don't want their babies eaten, their seeds,
Hmm.
with certain exceptions. And so they use a protein, a sticky protein called a lectin, that is designed to make their predator, including us, not thrive, feel ill, get depressed, get anxious, hurt. And a smart animal, if they are eating these plants and are not thriving, usually says, every time I eat this particular plant or this particular plant seed, I'm not doing very well.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to eat this anymore. I'm going to go eat something else. And this was a beautiful balance of power. So lectins are designed by the plant to stick to sugar molecules. And those sugar molecules line our mouth, our gut, our swallowing tube. They line our blood vessels, they
Hmm.
line our joints, they line the spaces between nerves where nerves talk to each other.
Hmm.
And you can prove, and the book shows multiple references, how lectins disrupt or stick to these joint surfaces.
Hmm.
Give you a quick example. I just published a paper in Circulation in the American Heart Association Journal, looking at one of the lectins in whole wheat called wheat germ agglutinin. It's not present in, um, for instance, it's not gluten. Gluten, by the way, is a lectin.
Hmm.
But wheat germ agglutinin is a little tiny lectin that can go through the wall of our gut without leaky gut, and it will stick to a sugar molecule that I write about in our blood vessels called Nu5AC.
Hmm.
And it goes right for Nu5AC and sticks just like a splinter. And because it's a foreign protein, our white blood cells view it as a splinter, and they start attacking the surfaces of our blood vessels.
Wow.
And I showed by a very sophisticated test called a pulse test that came out of USC, that if we took lectins and whole grains out of people's diets, even people who were gluten-free, that the inflammation on the wall of the blood vessel would subside.
Hmm.
And when we reintroduced like whole grain bread, it would occur again. So,
Interesting.
yeah, so this is really measurable things. It's not pseudoscience, it's
Yep.
not conjecture. Now, my critics would say, well, come on, people have been eating whole grains for the last 10,000 years, which is true.
Hmm.
People have been eating beans for the last 10,000 years, which is true. However, one of the things that is new is that, believe it or not, we've only been eating grains and beans for 10,000 years. They were not part of ancient humans' diets.
Hmm.
And number two, we have a really impressive defense system against plant lectins. And it starts with our stomach acid, which can digest a lot of proteins.
Hmm.
And we have a wonderful layer of mucus normally that would trap lectins before they got to the wall of our gut.
Hmm.
We have we had a wonderful microbiome, 100 trillion different bacteria that some of whom really enjoy munching on lectins. In fact, there's a bacteria that likes to eat gluten, of all things. But what the other purpose of the plant paradox was, there are 7 deadly disruptors that have screwed up our defense system just horribly, from acid-reducing drugs to antibiotics that we're given or are in our food that we eat. Even if you see antibiotic-free on a chicken label or a hamburger label, bet that 50% of the things that say antibiotic-free aren't antibiotic-free, and we can get into it. And then we take, speaking of exercise, we take ibuprofen, Advil, Aleve for every ache and pain, without knowing that these substances actually are like swallowing hand grenades. One ibuprofen will blow craters in the wall of your gut.
Wow.
And people don't realize that in the 1970s, when these drugs were available, they were prescription only, and they came with a warning that you could only use them for 2 weeks because they were so dangerous.
Wow.
And now, we pop them like candy. My shoulder hurts because I worked out too hard yesterday. I'll take 2 Advil or.
Wow.
And, yeah.
I had no idea ibuprofen had that effect on our gut.
Yeah, and in fact, well, it's an interesting story in and of itself. The drug companies knew that this happened, and I cite some of the research in the plant paradox. And that's why it came with a warning label. But these NSAIDs, as they're called, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, were a replacement for aspirin. And aspirin was known to cause stomach ulcers. And these drugs were developed so that they didn't cause stomach ulcers. But what they knew and we didn't know was that they caused ulcers in the small intestine. Wow. And we didn't know that because our gastroscopes, if anybody's swallowed that black tube to look down in their stomach, don't get into the small intestine. They only go into the stomach and the first portion of the bowel called the duodenum. So we didn't know that all this was happening downstream because we couldn't see it. And that's the loophole. So when people were taking these things, no, you don't have any bleeding in your stomach, you're fine. And all the mischief was down below.
Remarkable. So with leaky gut and lectins, no beans you mentioned. What other foods are we eliminating here?
Yeah, so the other thing that's happened to us, all of us in America, actually the world, are originally from Africa, Asia, or Europe. We were all originally from Africa, but we won't go there. So none of us were exposed until 500 years ago to a North or South American plant. And that started with Columbian trade, with Columbus. And so there are a huge number of our favorite foods that are actually very new to our immune system, to our gut. And those are the nightshade families, excuse me, like peppers, like tomatoes, like potatoes, like goji berries. Goji berries is an American plant. They were taken to China and trade and grew very well. Quinoa. The Incas actually had 3 detoxification processes to get the lectins out of quinoa. Peanuts. Peanuts are a bean. They're a legume. 95% of human beings carry a preformed antibody to the peanut lectin.
Wow.
And cashews. Cashews have such lectins on them that there's even cashew picker's disease, where you get horrible burns on your hands by taking the cashew nut off the cashew fruit.
Interesting.
And in the Amazon, the cashew fruit is eaten and the nut is thrown away because it's so dangerous. So
remarkable.
I love the fact that people are having their cashew milk.
Right.
And you wouldn't believe the number of people who've heard me speak who had impressive stomach issues, and they got rid of their cashews and their cashew milk, and miraculously it went away.